Okay, so I decided to make one more quick video on what happens when the old ones become an active player. And I thought it was necessary to do it now instead of interrupting the gameplay video to explain it all. So, real quick, let's talk about what happens. On the old one's turn, once they become an active player, and that happens when we surpass space 22 on the time track. Once we land here, they become an active player from then on out for the rest of the game. So there's going to be three things you're going to check for on their turn every time they get to go. So the first thing you're going to check for is number one, they're going to move one space forward on the time track, and they're only going to move one space at a time. The second thing that could possibly happen is if they landed on an illuminated space. As you can see, there's a darker time track space and an illuminated time track space. And if they land on the illuminated version of it, an event card will be drawn. And the event cards I showed you earlier, there's three different levels of those. And I'll show you that after we talk about this. So number three is the possible thing that will always happen is if there are any face-up old ones capable of moving out in on the board, then we will be drawing two old one cards and resolving any movement. So those three steps will happen on every single turn. Like I said, if they land on a dark space here, we're going to skip step 2, which is the event card step. You won't have to draw an event card if they land on a darker time track space. So let's talk about the event cards real quick. So I have a line of cards here that I have all set up that I wanted to talk about specifically. Let's check out the first one. The first one says, reveal the old one in the lowest numbered hex. So if we go to the board here, the lowest numbered hex can be determined by looking at these numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and they go all the way up to 44 is the highest number. So you can see that number here in the left bottom corner. So in this example, spot 4 is the lowest number currently. So we would flip that over. And now that old one is face up on the board. All right. This event card says reveal the old one in the lowest numbered hex and draw 6 cards for its movement. So in addition to revealing it like we did for the other event card, this event card also wants us to draw 6 cards for movement. We're going to draw those 6 cards and flip them over, and you're going to see that these are the same cards we used for combat. Now, the circles is what you're looking for movement. Ignore everything else. You're going to go down the column and see that, oh, there's the icon for him. There's no circle. Here's one of an example where there is a circle behind him, so he will move. Old ones will only move 1 hex at a time per card that have a circle behind it. So for these 6 cards, there's only 2 cards here that have a circle behind him, so he will move 2 hexes. And I will show you how movement is determined after I explain the event cards. So, the interesting thing about this event card is these 6 movement cards that we drew are only for this flipped over monster that we just flipped over. It's not going to be for the rest of the monsters that are out. But we still have to do step 3 of an old one's turn, which is any face-up old ones that are capable of moving will move. So there could be him and other face-up old ones out there that still have to move, so we have to draw 2 more cards for that step, which is the final step of their turn, and resolve movement there. So potentially this guy could move quite a bit, and it could get kind of crazy. All right, let me go on to the next card. The next card says, Assassinations. Remove the 2 rightmost personality cards from the display. Draw replacements. So if we go over here, whenever an assassination card comes up, it's always going to pertain to the rightmost cards in this line. So these 2 cards would be assassinated when that card comes up. We would move these 3 over and then draw 2 more cards to place in the leftmost spot for this line of cards. The final event card that I wanted to talk about says, draw and place a level 3 old one tile face up on each revealed temple. There could be a time when you have flipped over tiles out there on the board and there are temples and they look just like this. So in a case like that, if there are temples on the board that are face up, you will have to draw a level 3 old one for those spots and place it on that temple. Now you have these guys that could potentially move on step 3 of an old one's turn, which is all face up old ones get to move. Also, if you ever run out of level 3 tiles, old one tiles for this step, you're going to use level 2 old one tiles. Something to just take note of. Now I think it's time to move on into the movement of these old ones and how they move. Okay, just so you know, the rules on Tabletopia here probably won't be the most fully updated rules for the game when it actually hits Kickstarter next week. So I know this because if you go to Board Game Geek here, there is a posting that I did post some questions in, and it pertains, here let me zoom in, it pertains to a new movement method that's going to be happening for the old ones. Instead of, and I'll show you how the movement is done here in just a second, but instead of what's currently in place, they're going to have this sort of way where you could use a compass kind of thing to determine what hex they're going to move into as they move closer to your farms, your ports, and everything like that. So I wanted to mention this, that you know the movement rules that I'm going to be using in my playthrough are going to be changed to this for the full game. So just something to keep in mind. When old ones move, currently with the current rules, you can see there's a left and a right symbol in the different corners of the old one. And how the rules currently state is when determining what hex to move these to as they move towards, let's say, this port right here, you would have to basically rotate this tile to be facing the coastline and then use the left and right in the top to determine, well, which hex is he going to move? Because he might only be moving one hex. Does he move left or does he move right? So this is just one thing to keep in mind when I do my playthrough, that this will be changing. So now that that's all been said, let's talk about these cards and how they pertain to movement. As I mentioned before in my past videos on this, the circles are used to determine movement. You can ignore everything else on these cards because everything else pertains to combat. So except for these top spots right here, which are also going to be changing, right? These pertain to the left and right. So for example, this particular guy here, no movement, no movement, no movement, no movement. And in this one, he has a movement. And I've already orientated him towards the coastline, and it says he's going to move right. So you're going to take this and move it here, one space. Then this is going to happen, and he's going to move. This time you would ignore this because he's actually going to move to your port. He's not going to pick, from there. This left and right sort of system is only used when you have, equidistant tiles to move to. So I should probably have mentioned that sooner, but in this step here, when he moved only one for this card, there's two possibilities where he could land. So he's going to move here because of the right symbol moving right here. So it sounds confusing, but it's really not that bad once you start playing. But I'm actually glad that they're changing this to what I think is a much more elegant solution. So I'm happy to see that change. But whenever he's this close and he has one movement with this card, he will definitely move onto your port or your farm or whatever else. They're always going to try to get to those things and to attack your port or to blight your farms. That's the whole point. But that pretty much wraps up the movement. So just to summarize the 3 steps already mentioned, the first step is to move their disc on the time track one time forward. Oops. So that's going to happen like this. If they land on an illuminated space, you're going to go to step 2. If not, skip step 2. Step 2 is to draw an event card. You could end up with one of these type of event cards or one that has nothing on it, and you got lucky basically. Then you're going to move to step 3, and step 3 is to move any face up old ones that are out here by drawing 2 old one cards to make that happen. So you draw 2 cards, you flip them over, and you follow the movement rules I described earlier to move those units towards the closest farm or the closest port possible. And you're going to use these left and right mechanism with the old one facing the coastline to determine which hex they'll move towards, or which farm, like if there's 2 different farms they could get to, what farm they're going to move towards. So that's how that's used. And finally, that whole movement system is changing as described earlier in the video. So thank you for watching. I'm going to end it there, and I'm going to move on into gameplay. Thanks for watching. Bye.